Shelling and other fighting continued across Syria Monday after UN monitors found evidence over the weekend of another mass killing in Kuber, a village 20 miles west of Hama. I'm Michael Slackman. Today on TimesCast, we'll discuss how the lessons learned during last year's Arab Spring are playing out on the ground in Syria. But we begin first in the southern Turkish city of Antakya, where our Beirut bureau chief, Neil McFarquhar, has been reporting for the last few days. On that border, some 25,000 refugees are resigned to a very long stay.
From this southern city in Antakya, Turkey, just 60 miles away, lies the Syrian commercial capital and largest city of Aleppo, or Halab in Arabic. But for at least 25,000 Syrian refugees living in camps or in crowded apartments, it is increasingly becoming a world apart. The violence is increasing rather than decreasing. Opposition groups reported dozens of people killed over the weekend, especially in Damascus, where fighting has not taken place previously. The dilemma is how the opposition can emerge triumphant in its quest for an open democratic Syria. And so far, in Damascus or in Aleppo, the government is not showing signs that it is shaken. Some people are undertaking long-term projects, like one Syrian-American doctor who started an organization to build a hospital to rehabilitate opposition fighters.
I never thought it's going to be lasting that long. A year ago, we were individual working, randomly working. There's not really more of that coordination. Right now, we have more people coming forward. We are getting more organized. Maybe this is the only good thing about the revolution taking longer, because really we are thinking who's the best people working with us.
Despite the frustration of the refugees here, they're doing what they can to influence the situation across the border. Some of them are trying to help set up local governments there. Some of them are shipping medical supplies. All kinds of things flow across the border. But with every week bringing reports of new massacres and higher levels of sectarian fighting, Syria seems to be slouching ever closer towards civil war.
With me now is Andrew Tabler, a Syria expert from the Washington Institute. Andrew, do you think that from his vantage point in Damascus, President Bashar al-Assad is looking across at what's happening in Egypt and seeing Hosni Mubarak in prison and feeling like he has nothing to lose?
Absolutely. Bashar al-Assad shows no sign of willingness to step aside without the use of force. And he looks increasingly at those transitions as worst case scenarios. So what he's been doing is relying on Russia as well as Iran to increasingly arm his regime and allow him to try and shoot his way out of the crisis. The only problem is the Syrian opposition continues to go out in the streets. They're fighting back more than ever before, and there's no end in sight to the fighting.
Well, let's come back to Russia in a minute, but let's stick with this idea that the opposition is fighting like never before. How are they doing that? Are they becoming more organized? Are they getting weapons and money from abroad? How are they congealing into a more effective fighting force?
They are increasingly organized, but more and more weapons are coming into the country, specifically from Turkey, and those weapons are being used against the regime's forces and armor, so anti-tank weapons, light weapons.
You don't mean Turkish weapons, you mean across the border from Turkey?
Correct, they're smuggled in from Turkey. They're not provided directly by the state. Mm-hmm. And the opposition in Syria, what they call the Free Syrian Army, they have stepped up their attacks against the regime and recently have moved their attacks not only into Aleppo, but into Damascus as well, which we saw in the last week.
So basically, we're talking about an ongoing civil conflict where the government can't stop the opposition from fighting and the opposition can't topple the government.
Right, and unfortunately a conflict that seems like it's going to suck in most of the regional powers, with Iran and Russia on one side of the regime, and Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and a little bit Egypt on the other with the opposition.
Why has Washington and Western allies, in your view, been reluctant to get more involved in this?
Because they're not sure about what kind of intervention would actually be able to solve the crisis and actually try and disperse the hurricane that's gathered in the Eastern Mediterranean. So basically what we're seeing at the moment is policy stasis, but there are increased calls from within Washington, and particularly in Europe, for some sort of intervention, whether it's indirect by support for the opposition on the ground, or direct through airstrikes or for example, the creation of safe havens along the Turkish border.
Is it possible also that policymakers in Washington and other Western capitals, again taking a lesson from the Arab Spring, are looking at looking at Egypt and other countries where the leaders were toppled and saying, we don't want to go there. Maybe the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know.
Yes, but here's the thing. There's really nothing we can do to stop what's going on in Syria. I think that it's just something that has to play out. I think policymakers understand how really little we can do to actually change the direction of events. The question is whether we want Bashar al-Assad's regime to survive or not. And I don't think anyone sees Bashar holding on as a solution to this crisis, perhaps with the exception of Russia.
So tell me, finally, is there any chance that Russia will back off and give up its support for?
It doesn't seem very likely, really it would be a loss for Russia if the regime went down. I think that only in the event that the Russians would see that the Assad regime, that the balance was tipping against it, that they would perhaps decide to protect their interests there and perhaps oust the Assad family and allow for some sort of managed transition. That's what the United States is trying to press for at the moment.